Something weird happened in like every episode of House of the Dragon Season 1. I kept feeling a sense of deja vu somewhere near the midpoint of each. And I may be overthinking it, but every episode starts running backward at about halfway through. Here's how. This is more than just foreshadowing, red herrings, and other literary devices. There's a rigid format here, hiding under our noses yet before our eyes, with clever world building and very specific rules. Rule 1. There are always 5 story elements from the first half of the episode. Rule 2. In the second half, those 5 are revisited in reverse order. And Rule 3. Small changes underscore emotional or narrative context. Let's examine these rules with a dive into the first episode. Then we'll march through the rest of the season after that, example by example. And I hope I made believers of everyone by the end. Episode 1, Heirs of the Dragon, starts with a ceremony to announce the heir. A precedent for men is set when Viserys is chosen, then an unworthy occupant upon the Iron Throne. Daemon is heir, but not yet king. Then Daemon among his gold cloaks. He brutally defends the city of his royal brother. Then a council meeting about Daemon. His violent tactics are called into question as Lord Commander. Then a crowd at an event. The people celebrate violence and death. Okay, so these are the 5 story elements. Rule 1 has been satisfied. They aren't necessarily critical plot elements themselves, yet they will play a critical role in the narrative moving forward. And in each episode, one specific moment or scene is our pivot, where we turn around 180 degrees. Then we revisit the 5 story elements in reverse order. This will satisfy Rule 2. The death of Queen Aemma is our pivotal moment in Episode 1. We return to a crowd at an event, and we must abide Rule 3, which requires a small change for emotional or narrative purposes. So now it's a funeral where the Targaryens grieve violence and death. And back to a council meeting about Daemon, but now his violent reign is called into question as king. Anti-Daemon animosity rises dramatically. And back to Daemon among his gold cloaks. But now he brutally mocks the succession of his royal brother. And back to an unworthy occupant upon the Iron Throne. But now Viserys is king, but not yet worthy. And finally, it ends with a ceremony to announce the heir. But now the precedent for men is broken when Rhaenyra is chosen. Rule 1 calls for 5 elements per episode. Rule 2 calls for them to be revisited in reverse order. And Rule 3 calls for changes that reflect emotional or narrative context. That is hairpin storytelling, which is how every episode starts running backward near the midpoint. Hopefully, I've shaken your skepticism, but admittedly, one set of examples isn't enough. So now we'll finally charge through the rest of Season 1, episode by episode. I hope to make believers of you all by the end. Episode 2, The Rogue Prince, starts with Corlys and the Triarchy. Viserys refuses to rush into battle. Then a Targaryen's ill-advised choice. Rhaenyra chooses Criston Cole against Otto's counsel. Then a father-daughter talk. They fail to open up to one another over dinner. Then a Velaryon marriage is weighed. Otto downplays the whole idea. Then a woman's duty in the patriarchy. Rhaenys explains how powerless Rhaenyra is. And finally, Daemon's theft of the dragon egg is our pivotal moment. We return to a woman's duty in the patriarchy, but now Otto demonstrates how powerless Alicent is. And back to a Velaryon marriage weighed, but now Lionel hypes up the whole idea. And back to a father-daughter talk, but now they manage to open up to one another over Emma's memory. And back to a Targaryen's ill-advised choice, but now Viserys chooses Alicent against everyone's counsel. And finally, it ends with Corlys and the Triarchy. Daemon agrees to rush into battle. Episode 3, Second of His Name, starts with Daemon at war. As a dragon rider, he's losing. Then news about the Stepstones. Viserys declines to provide aid. Then a marriage proposal for Rhaenyra. Jason Lannister offers her Casterly Rock. Then an imposter in place of a king. Viserys, the wrong heir, is captive by the lords of the realm. And an ego is removed from succession. Lionel reveals his support for someone else's direction. And at last, Rhaenyra killing the boar is our pivotal moment. We return to an ego removed from succession, but now Viserys reveals his regrets for his own direction. And back to an imposter in place of a king, but now a brown deer, the wrong stag, is captive by the lords of the realm. And back to a marriage proposal for Rhaenyra, but now Viserys offers her anyone in Westeros. And back to news about the Stepstones, but now Viserys agrees to provide aid. And finally, it ends with Daemon at war, but now as a foot soldier, he's winning. Episode 4, King of the Narrow Sea, starts with an underdog winning out. Young Blackwood takes down a troublesome bully. Then a manipulation of Viserys. Daemon earns his welcome despite their previous encounter. Then Alicent versus Rhaenyra. Alicent is jealous of the princess's romantic life. Then politics meets theatrics. The mummers twist the truth of what Rhaenyra knows. Then a Targaryen takes what it wants. Viserys desires Alicent. And finally, Daemon rejecting Rhaenyra is our pivotal moment. We return to a Targaryen taking what it wants, but now Rhaenyra desires Criston Cole. And back to politics meeting theatrics, but now Viserys twists the truth of what Otto knows. And back to Alicent versus Rhaenyra, but now Alicent is disgusted by the princess's sex life. And back to a manipulation of Viserys, but now Daemon earns his rage despite their previous encounter. Then finally, it ends with an underdog winning out, but now Viserys takes down the compromised hand. Episode 5, We Light the Way, starts with a Targaryen marriage bookend. Daemon murders Rhea Royce after a hostile encounter. Then Alicent is with an ally. She loses Otto and her prospects dwindle. Then an ill-timed proposal. Criston Cole wants to run away with Rhaenyra to Essos. Then dishonor is haunting Criston. His guilt is made public by a confession. Then a focus on royal legacy. Viserys worries about the reign he's leaving behind. And finally, the crowd arriving for the wedding is our pivotal moment. We return to a focus on royal legacy, but now Alicent worries about the reign her son will inherit. And back to dishonor haunting Criston, but now his guilt is made public by Joffrey Monmouth. And back to an ill-timed proposal, but now Daemon wants to run away with Rhaenyra to Dragonstone. And back to Alicent with an ally, but now she gains Cole and her prospects improve. And finally, it concludes with a Targaryen marriage bookend, but now Rhaenyra marries Laenor after a hostile encounter. Episode 6, The Princess and the Queen, starts with the wishes of the Queen. Alicent commands and Rhaenyra obeys. Then a family parade. Rhaenyra climbs up to the Red Keep with Laenor and baby in tow. Then a father and his boys. Harwin visits with his family, greeting Joffrey. Then a hopeful dragon rider. Jace continues commanding a dragon. Then a poorly kept secret. Alicent confronts Viserys about the bastard truth. And finally, Harwin attacking Criston is our pivotal moment. We return to a poorly kept secret, but now Lionel confronts Harwin about the bastard truth. And back to a hopeful dragon rider, but now Baela dreams of commanding a dragon. and back to a father and his boys. But now Harwin visits with his family, saying goodbye. And back to a family parade. But now Rhaenyra climbs up to Dragonstone with everyone in tow. Then finally, it ends with the wishes of the queen. But now Alicent whinges and Larys obeys. Episode 7, Driftmark, starts with a Daemon marriage bookend. He attends the funeral of Laena. Then an attempt at family unity. Viserys extends an unsuccessful olive branch to Daemon. Then two power players unite. Daemon sees Rhaenyra in a whole new light after all these years. Then a want despite the consequences. Aemond lays claim to Vhagar, usurping Baela. Then greens versus blacks. The children form allegiances because of Vhagar. And finally, Aemond losing an eye is our pivotal moment. We return to greens versus blacks, but now the adults form allegiances because of the children. And back to a want despite the consequences, but now Alicent lays claim to Luke's eye, usurping Viserys. And back to two power players uniting, but Otto sees Alicent in a whole new light after all these years. And back to an attempt at family unity, but now Laenor extends an unsuccessful olive branch to Rhaenyra. And finally, it ends with a Daemon marriage bookend, but now he attends the wedding to Rhaenyra. Episode 8, The Lord of the Tides, starts with Alicent over a succession. Vaemond hopes to use an ambitious queen to place himself on a throne. Then a reunion of old friends. The icy regard hardens between Alicent and Rhaenyra. Then Aemond taunts his nephews. He calls out their poor training. Then a Targaryen pleads. Rhaenyra begs for Rhaenys to put aside their differences. Then a claim to be the Driftmark heir. Vaemond puts forward himself as the best option. And finally, Viserys hobbling to the Iron Throne is our pivotal moment. We return to a claim to be the Driftmark heir, but now Rhaenys puts forward Corlys's wish as the best option. And back to a Targaryen pleading, but now Viserys begs for everyone to put aside their differences. And back to Aemond taunting his nephews, but now he calls out their bastard blood. And back to a reunion of old friends. But now the icy regard softens between Alicent and Rhaenyra. And finally, it ends with Alicent over a succession. But now Alicent hopes to use a bedridden king to place Aegon on a throne. Episode 9, The Green Council, starts with a Green Council plan. They begin to install Aegon as the king after Viserys. Then a search around the city. Criston and Aemond search for a missing Aegon. Then a victim of sordid human affairs. Children suffer the whims of gamblers for survival. Then succession is tempting Aemond. He announces his worthiness to rule over his brother. Then a move by the White Worm. She offers information in exchange for Otto's presence. Finally, Alicent earnestly mourning the death of Viserys is our pivotal moment. We return to a move by the White Worm, but now she offers Aegon in exchange for Otto's cooperation. And back to succession tempting Aemond, but now Aegon denounces his worthiness to rule over his brother. And back to a victim of sordid human affairs, but now Alicent suffers the whims of Larys for information. And back to a search around the city, but now Rhaenys and Eric hunt for an unguarded exit. Then finally, it ends with a Green Council plan, but now they successfully install Aegon as the king after Viserys. Episode 10, The Black Queen, starts with news of a family death. Rhaenys announces the death of Viserys. Then Prince Luke falls. Jace plays a bit too rough and loses control. Then the Queen's command is reinforced. Jace holds his uncle to Rhaenyra's wishes. Then a loyalty is established. Each Kingsguard swears his allegiance to Rhaenyra. Then Rhaenyra embraces her birthright. she wears the crown as a symbol of her legitimacy. And finally, a sign of peace from Alicent is our pivotal moment. We return to Rhaenyra embracing her birthright, but now she accepts the prophecy as a symbol of her legitimacy, and back to a loyalty established, but now Corlys swears his allegiance to Rhaenyra, and back to the Queen's command reinforced, but now the Queen holds her sons to Rhaenyra's wishes, and back to Prince Luke falling, but now Aemond plays a bit too rough and loses control. Then finally, it ends with news of a family death, but now Daemon announces the death of Luke. And that is hairpin storytelling in every episode of House of the Dragon Season 1. I noticed it in Episode 2, and I've been tracking it each week with growing excitement. Hopefully I made you a believer too, but of course I could be wrong. Maybe I'm just overthinking it. Maybe you can find a pattern anywhere if you care to look hard enough. And maybe it's just a coincidence that some patterns repeat perfectly, as though by design. But I kinda like my theory better, so I'm rolling with it. Until next time, keep reading between them lines. Hey, are you subscribed? Would you kindly like and maybe comment on this video? And maybe a couple others on the channel too? I would greatly appreciate it. Thank you so much for your time.